So as a part of this rabbit hole I went down that started with like, I want to like make an application and I feel like there should be layout components, but there aren't. It really got me thinking a lot more about component libraries in general. So we're moving on from when should you use React to, I want to discuss sort of the state of React and component libraries and component like library infrastructure in general. So this will be a new section. And I sort of going down this rabbit hole. I was also like, boy, this really sucks. I see all these component libraries that seem to be sort of duplicating themselves, but doing things differently in some ways. But it seems like there's still a lot of shared knowledge between them, shared logic, really. And so that's when I was like, oh yeah, I remember the creator of Chakra UI created this new library called Zag, like Z-A-G, ZagJS or something like that. So Zag is essentially a state machine library for UI components. And so I was like really intrigued by this. I'm like, I got to go check this out more because I want to have, I think a big problem with component libraries is some of them have components I want, and then I'll be like using it and I'm like, oh, this other one has a component I wanted, but it's not in this one. And I got to go remake it, or I got to find some random thing on NPM. And I'm like, why isn't more of this shared? Why isn't there a larger body of components in these component libraries? Why don't they have like almost like I'm thinking a much better way, a much better state for the React ecosystem would be, hey, this is how we build UIs. And this is how layouts work. And you can have different component libraries that have different approaches to things, but a lot of the fundamentals are the same. A lot of what we want is the same. And so ZagJS is this library that the creator of Chakra UI made so that they could share this logic between, it sounds like they originally created it so they could share logic between the Vue version of Chakra UI and the React version. But I got to thinking, this really is the type of thing that should be shared across all component libraries. So with ZagJS, you can go to the website and it's got components, but they're not full components. It's basically just the logic. So maybe you have a toggle button. They have a Zag, quote, component for a toggle button, which really just provides logic in an API for interacting with the toggle button. So it defines the states a toggle button can be in. It can be activated or deactivated. When it's in a deactivated state and it gets interacted with, it transitions to the activated state, and vice versa. And then on top of this, the Zag library provides the sort of, I don't know what you call it, but essentially ways to hook into your markup. So it provides like data tags that can be injected into your markup. So it's like, hey, so you just interject whatever it says the current markup should be. So for example, with this toggle component, when the toggle is activated, it might inject a data state equals activated into your markup. So you can write CSS or more JavaScript that selects based on this markup that it adds. So the cool thing about ZagJS is it essentially takes care of the bottom layer of your components. It handles the logic, so you don't have to keep rewriting logic between component libraries. But it also handles the sort of markup side of it, the styling side of it, without coming with styling per se. So you could use Zag to create your own component library. You could use it for Material UI, Chakra UI, all of them. They could all share this foundation. And I love this idea. This is fantastic. In theory, I'm super excited about this because it's like, yeah, why are we duplicating all this work? But that also got me thinking, like, what this is really showing me is that all these component libraries, not only are they based on React, which adds a lot of overhead, which is complicated, but they also have complicated logic within them, which makes sense because, like we've been talking about, React is good at that kind of thing. But it also, I think, was just highlighting to me how complicated these things are and how much abstraction we have in this ecosystem. So ZagJS, I'm like trying to learn how it works, and I'm like, this is like not super simple. Like, it is super simple conceptually, but when you get into the API and how to use it, you're like, wow, this is actually kind of complicated. So I'm like, I think what this is really showing me is that from a design standpoint, developing these components can create a lot. It might have a lot of intrinsic complexity. And so I think that's great. There's this library Zag that is helping to sort of standardize this complexity and centralize it and make it so we don't have to keep rewriting it all the time. And I definitely want to try out Zag some more and actually use it myself. I think it could save a lot of time. But this is like, if we go all the way back to the beginning of the episode, this is kind of what led me down this rabbit hole was I was like, yeah, this shows to me that there's just a lot of intrinsic inherent complexity in these components in using React for anything. So not only do you have the complexity of compiling your React code, your JSX code, getting it to run in the browser and adding routers and query caches and all this other stuff. Not only do we have that, we also have the complicated logic that goes along with these components that we use from the component libraries. And that's before we add our own complicated logic in our own state. And so it really just made me think, like, wow, this is actually just like, I think it's easy when we're developing these applications to forget how many layers and how much abstraction and how much overhead is really here. And that may be perfectly fine. It might be. But at the same time, I'm like, wow, maybe we're overusing React. And so that's really what led to me trying to create this sort of framework for figuring out when you should use React in 2023 was maybe we are overusing it because, of just this sort of industry trend that this always happens. Something becomes popular, people learn it, and that's just what you use for everything. But React is really heavyweight, especially when you bring in these component libraries, and it may not be the best choice for everything. So that's what led to the rest of this episode. But yeah, I'm curious if anyone has tried out ZagJS. Just let me know what your experience is with it, or anything like it, or if you think it's a great idea. I'd love to hear from you. But it also got me thinking to sort of